Bravo. No. Okay, there you go.
We can still see it on your back.
What about the Sasha?
Yeah. Okay. You didn't see anything. I didn't. Come on. All right. Let's give another hand for Artie. You can read Middle English, which blows my mind. So we've heard Middle English, Modern English, and tonight you might hear some Chicago English. Just thank you for letting me speak. Thanks for inviting me to speak. I think everyone speaking tonight was sitting around Adrian one day at lunch, and Adrian said, "You guys want to come speak?" We all said, "Sure." So, testament to Adrian's friendship and power of persuasion. So, this is not a test. No, it actually is a test. So what is it a test of? I won't tell you just yet, but I'll give you 4 clues. It's about those 4 things: sports, tribal sovereignty, passports, and borders. So maybe getting a sense of what this could be about. Those in the back, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Great. This is actually the topic of today's presentation. We're talking about sports, tribal sovereignty, passports. I'll explain in a second. So this is related to an incident in 2010, so 8 years ago, when the passports of the Haudenosaunee men's team, the Iroquois Nationals, their passports were denied by England while they were en route to the World Championship lacrosse in Manchester, England. English authorities asked for either a U.S. passport or Canadian passport. The team said, no, we're a sovereign nation, we'll use our passports. And so the team was forced to forfeit their matches. They had the option of getting U.S. passports, but they said, no, we're a sovereign nation, so we're not going to use a U.S. passport. That's the topic. Have any of you heard of this event? Okay, I see some hands in the crowd. Great. Well, before we go on, I'd like to acknowledge my relationship to the land and to the research. I am the grandson of Irish immigrants and settlers to the Chicago area, the land of the Peoria, the Potawatomi, and the Miami. And today, as you may know, we're here to the traditional home for 1,000 years, and today to the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of Credit River. As a non-native person, I feel it's a privilege to be able to study this topic. With it, I think carries certain responsibilities. Also, I'm neither a lawyer nor a native person, so I may get some things wrong today, so please feel free to correct me. Great. So what happened, you're wondering? What did happen? So England's the host of the 2010 lacrosse championship. I didn't know there was a world championship, but there is. It was in England in 2010. Their passports were rejected. The U.S. says travel under U.S. passports, you'll be allowed in. The team says no, they're stuck in New York. So if you want to drill down, what really happened in more detail is that England said you can come in as long as we have guaranteed that the U.S. will let you back in. So we'll give you the visa if the U.S. will allow you permission to come back. The U.S. said no. Since 2008, they've asked the Haudenosaunee to travel on U.S. passports. So for up until the last second, the U.S. said, no, you can't come back in. So the team is stuck in this bind. England says they can't come in unless the U.S. lets them back in. The U.S. says no. The U.S. later says, yes, you can come in, but England still refuses. There's 2 colonial governments saying no. And the team decides to forfeit the matches and stay in New York. So they were traveling from their territory in New York, Quebec, Ontario. They were in New York at this point, seeking to fly out of New York to get to England. Since 1923, the Haudenosaunee that's their team there. So since 1923, the Haudenosaunee have been issuing their own passports. Since the 70s, they've been recognized by various governments around the world. But after 9/11, the U.S., along with Canada, issued more stringent requirements on what would be allowable for international travel. And the U.S. authorities said the Haudenosaunee passport, because it didn't have a certain microchip, it wasn't machine readable, wasn't e-verifiable, it was not a legitimate travel document. The Haudenosaunee, as a sovereign nation, said this right impinges on their right to freely cross the border. To accept a U.S. passport would be to give up their sovereignty, which they haven't, and so they were stuck in New York. So, to step back from a second though, I want to use two, can you see okay over there? Yeah? Okay, great. Two framing devices, critical geography and tribal sovereignty. So do we have any geographers in the room? I was next to one at dinner, I guess he left. So critical geography, basically saying, let's question the border. The border is not this forever lasting thing that's removed from power. It's related to domination, related to power. So let's question why that border is there in the first place. And let's problematize the border. Let's not take it for granted. In this case, the US border with the Haudenosaunee. And then, and passport sovereignty. So I would argue, I think leaders of the team would agree that passports are an expression of national identity and culture, and also related to the reconnection of indigenous people to their lands and the reunification of their territories. According to the chief of the Onondaga, one of the nations of the Confederacy, the passport is a reaffirmation of our nation, its independence, and the future of its people. So let's back up even further. The Haudenosaunee have been in this area for thousands of years. Recent scholarship dates back the Confederacy to 1142, so a long time. The world's oldest confederacy and representative form of government. Originally, as you may know, 5 nations, Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk. The Tuscarora joined later, after British and Americans got involved. And while the territory has greatly been contracted because of encroachment, colonization, treaties, you see here that's the reduction in their land area historically to today, they have never relinquished sovereignty. They're still a sovereign nation. On the U.S. side, they view the Haudenosaunee as what they call a domestic dependent nation, almost like a state. And this goes back to an 1831 Supreme Court decision that allows, where the U.S. ruled that, at least from their side, that the Haudenosaunee were a dependent nation, and in return for federal protection, they would make treaties on their behalf. Obviously, that's what the Americans think. This is not what the Haudenosaunee think. So, let's zoom in a little bit on the Haudenosaunee passport. Have any of you heard of this passport before today? See a few hands. Yeah, I didn't until I started working on this. I didn't. But as I say, it's issued in 1923. It's been accepted by many countries around the world. It's been used for international travel. The US and Canada don't view it as a, quote, acceptable form of identification. They're even more firm about that since 9/11 and the creation of the Western Hemispheric Travel Initiative, which makes for more stringent travel documentation. Let's back up here. And though it's not recognized, U.S. immigration officials, if they're at the border, they might be confused at first, but they'll accept it for land crossing. For international travel, you see, it gets more complicated and governments get involved. And of course, there's a huge irony here, a really messed up irony, in that the Haudenosaunee, who invented the sport of lacrosse, weren't allowed to attend an international match of lacrosse. And they're prevented from doing so by 2 colonial powers. So the colonial irony is rich and also deeply messed up. I also want to emphasize lacrosse is not just a sport, the Haudenosaunee. It's a gift given from the creator, the Haudenosaunee, so it's a way to honor the good creator. Further bits of irony, condemned by early French missionaries as violent, and now it's embraced around the world at East Coast prep schools in the States, and it's one of the two national sports of Canada. All right, so putting things in context, you might be a little confused about what happened in 2010. Well, let's just throw out a few dates here. There wasn't an Iroquois Nationals team until 1983, at least as recognized by the International Federation of Lacrosse. 1988, they allowed them in. And then it's after 9/11, the U.S. comes down really hard and says, you have to use a U.S. passport to travel, which the Haudenosaunee say, we're not U.S. citizens. And we get to 2010. So what happened? They announced it, it's going to be Manchester. The team had been talking to the UK. The UK objects to team travel plans, as I mentioned. They say, we'll let you in, but the US has to guarantee you'll be able to re-enter. The US says, I don't know. But then on July 14th, Secretary Clinton, the Secretary of State at the time, said, okay, we do a one-time waiver to re-enter the US without a US passport. But England says no. The Haudenosaunee team goes full court, diplomatic press, National Congress of American Indians gets involved, even US lawmakers. But UK says, sorry, can't come in. So nationals make a political stand, as well as a sports stand, and say, we're not going. That is, so probably tired of hearing me talk and look at text. So let's get a visual look of the day. This is the Iroquois Nationals. This is the men's lacrosse team, I should have mentioned. And also a women's team. The board of directors in 2010 showing his Haudenosaunee passport during a news conference in New York. That's the team hanging out. Probably getting a little, stir crazy. They're hoping to go compete, but they can't. So they're in their hotel room here on Queens. This is them in Long Island that day getting dinner. And these are some statements they made the day of. So it's not maybe to a player from the US or Canada, it's just a sport. This team is also spiritual, it's also an expression of sovereignty. So what are some conclusions? You might be wondering. This passport is an assertion of tribal sovereignty. It challenges colonial borders. I would argue too, US immigration probably wouldn't agree, but I would say that not recognizing the Haudenosaunee passport is part of this centuries-old process of trying to erase indigenous peoples from North America and their borders. And then looking forward, you might ask, well, what's going to happen? The U.S. really wants the Haudenosaunee to modernize their passports. Some negotiation may happen. The U.S. has expressed some willingness to work with the Haudenosaunee, but I would want to see that as two nations negotiating, not the U.S. Negotiating with an alleged dependent nation. And just when you think it's all over, the story continues. So in 2014, this happens to the women's team. They're going to Scotland, same thing happens, it's the UK, right? But pretty powerful. In 2015, the Onondaga Nation hosts the World Indoor Lacrosse Championships. So you don't need me to tell you the symbolic importance of that. If you haven't seen that movie, you should definitely watch it. It's on Amazon, I think. Great movie. It's about that 2015 championship. And then 2018 happens again en route to Israel, but in that case, the team is granted a visa and allowed to re-enter after traveling to Israel. So, to wrap up, what did we learn? This is a test. Thank you.